All right, so once again, I'm Dante Swinton. I have a bachelor's in environmental studies, master's in nonprofit management and social entrepreneurship from University of Baltimore, and excited to chat with you all and talk about things within this presentation and try to be more engaging and not just sharing information at you, but actually wanted to chat with you during it. So let's get started. All right. So we had some folks, I think, in their introductions kind of talk about this, but like, what do you all feel is environmental justice? And it can just be popcorn. You can come off of a mute and say what you think environmental justice means.
I'll just add like a bit, just a tidbit of it, but I guess environmental justice would be no matter where you live, the environment shouldn't discriminate on it shouldn't discriminate on a certain race or income or any of those variables. And so I guess it's us, like our job, the government's job also, to make sure that everyone's being placed in an area or living in an area where they have the same air quality, for example, as another area. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you for contributing, Sunny. You're definitely right about that. Let's get one or two more voices in here and then we'll keep going.
So I think that for me, environmental justice means that there's differences in the quality of the environment around you based on whatever socio or economic status or like different demographics. And kind of like what Sunny was saying, it's both our jobs as researchers and activists and the government's job to make sure that there is as little difference between areas as possible when it comes to things like predominantly areas of color versus predominantly white areas, for example.
Absolutely. Thank you both. You're definitely right on the money about that. Let's look at what the EPA gives as a definition. So it is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, as both of you said, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. So absolutely, like the idea of environmental justice is all about navigating ongoing racial injustice and socioeconomic injustice in some of these communities. And even for poor white folk in West Virginia, like there's a lot of environmental injustice from the history of coal being a major industry in that state and in other communities as well, having to deal with acidic water and very poor air quality. And so it affects so many people in different ways. All right, so this is a map of the location of trash incinerators in the country. What do you notice about this map?
There are a lot more on the East Coast.
Indeed. Definitely. All right, and so you've got a situation where trash incinerators are primarily located in the Northeast, but you also have some concentrations in Florida and Minnesota. Now, why do you think that might be the case? Why might all of these incinerators be so primarily located in the Northeast?
There's a lot of major cities between Philadelphia, Baltimore, New York, and others that are like in the Northeast, both. So like with more major cities, there's going to be more people, which calls for a need for more trash to be or waste to be disposed of.
Definitely. Now, so what do you think is the reason why cities like Baltimore and others would not lean on landfills or build new landfills? What are some issues with landfills?
Maybe it's because like landfills are really big and like in cities there's like a lot of people like close together, so it wouldn't be smart to have like huge piles of trash near like a lot of people.
Right, absolutely. You're right on the money, Sid. So landfills take up space. Landfills can be very smelly, and just people are not very interested in them. So you had a movement in the 70s and 80s to get a lot of these trash incinerators online because they are more compact than the space that landfill takes. And you're theoretically going to have less of an odor issue. But there are a lot of problems with that, and we'll talk about that in a moment. All right, so what is incineration? It is the process of shrinking the volume of trash by burning it. Then you get air pollution, ash, and steam from that burning, but it is the dirtiest way to manage waste or make energy. You might hear some folks call trash incinerators a waste to energy, which is just a commercial term to make themselves sound better. And it's the most expensive way to manage waste or make energy. These incinerators can cost anywhere from $100 million to $1 billion to build. The city almost had a second trash incinerator a few years ago, but fortunately, a lot of organizing and activists were able to get that project canceled. It would have been the largest trash incinerator in the country, and the one we have right now is one of the largest and one of the dirtiest as well. All right, so what do you notice about this graph?
Well, the black is, well, not like the black line. The green line is the ratio is a lot higher than the rest, as well as a lot of other different minorities, and like white. The red line for white people are like the second lowest.
Absolutely, that's definitely a noticeable component of this. So basically, what this graph is saying is, when you think about the distance, where you now analyze the distance between Black residents of the United States and white residents in the United States and other racial groups, you see that Black folk are more likely to be located within 1 to 5 miles of a trash incinerator in the country. And from that first one alone, you can see that white folks are under the 1 line. If everyone were equal, they'd be close to the 1 line. But since you see that the white folks are actually a little bit lower, then the distance between them and the Black folk at the 1 mile radius is 3 times the amount. So 3 times as likely to live within a mile of a trash incinerator. And then when you get to 5 miles, it's about 2 times as likely before things start to even out a little bit more. So that's a very problematic situation, because that means more pollution is going to be more proximate to Black communities when it comes to these trash incinerators. All right, and so that giant white smokestack with Baltimore written on the side is Baltimore's largest air polluter. It's our trash incinerator. It's been around since 1985. So we're running on 37 years of having this facility be the city's largest air polluter, putting out over 3 million pounds of toxic pollutants every single year. Putting out the, actually, in fact, this next graph kind of shows what's happening there. So every year that this incinerator puts out enough emissions to equal the combined emissions of cars. So for example, the amount of carbon monoxide that incinerator puts out equals the same amount of carbon monoxide that 542 cars put out. So that doesn't sound like much, because cars put out a lot of carbon monoxide. But when you look at some of the other pollutants like nitrogen oxides, which trigger asthma attacks and increase the lifetime risk of heart disease and stroke, that incinerator puts out enough to equal over 126,000 cars. When we're talking about climate and wanting to minimize our carbon footprint, it equals over 141,000 cars, the amount of CO2 it puts out. But as you can see, by the time you get to sulfur dioxide, which also triggers asthma attacks and increases the lifetime risk of heart disease and stroke, it amounts to nearly or over 1.7 million cars have to be driving every year to equal the amount of sulfur dioxide that is emitted from that trash incinerator. Okay, what do you notice about this coal graph?
Well, it's kind of a similar trend as the last one when it comes to comparing black versus white communities. There's like, when you go from a distance of 1 to 5 miles, there's a significant raise for Black people, and then for even a lot of the other races, there's not as much of a significant, I guess, raise in the race ratio. And so you can see that there's a greater, I guess, like operating like near Black communities.
Absolutely. You're right on the money. Despite things being a little more equal between Black Americans and white Americans here, there's still a discrepancy. And so within this is about 30% more likely at the 5 to 25 mile radius to be able to, or actually be exposed to the presence of a coal plant. And so this is the type of stuff that involves a lot of environmental injustice and the need for environmental justice. But environmental justice is more than toxics from plants, power plants and things like that. It's actually much more than that. It's also about green space. Does your community have access to a park or maybe some sort of nature trail? Does your community have a tree canopy? There are a lot of communities in Baltimore City where the majority of that neighborhood has no trees, or if it has some trees, they're very short. So without trees being able to cool off a community, you've got a lot of places like Sandtown and Westport and just multiple other spaces in East Baltimore as well that don't have a lot of tall trees to minimize the impact of the heat that we've been experiencing the last couple of weeks. So environmental justice is also about that. But I believe someone talked about earlier about safe housing. That's important too. That means, does your home have exposure to lead paint or radon or asbestos? If the home was built prior to 1975, a lot of the insulation in the house had asbestos in it, and that can create really, really toxic cancers for communities and for people that are exposed to that. So environmental justice has a lot of different components of it. So also including in that is access to healthy food or a grocery store. Cherry Hill, for example, does not have a grocery store. They have to go farther into South Baltimore to Lansdowne to go to the Walmart there. And that can take time, especially if you don't have a car. So these are different components of environmental injustice. All right, so let's talk zero waste. What do people think zero waste means?
I'm pretty sure that like zero waste is having the least amount of I guess things like trash going into landfill. Although I do see that like some people will count like recycled materials as waste because like the issues with recycling. So I guess it's just making sure that you reuse your things and have the least amount of single-use items as possible.
Absolutely. Very, very well described there. So let's get the international definition. It's the conservation of all resources by means of responsible production, consumption, reuse, and recovery of products, packaging, and materials without burning them and without discharges to the land, water, or air that threaten the environment or human health. So Kaya's right on the money there. It's about making sure that whatever we produce that we no longer need, so any, say, cereal boxes or any glass jars or any medicine bottles, like those are the types of things that we need to make sure that we're actually recapturing and not burning, because that leads to air pollution. And we just talked about how our trash incinerator has been our largest air polluter since the 80s. So it's really important to make sure you create a system that reuses material instead of trying to make it a cradle to grave system, as we like to call it. So it's you take the raw materials, you produce products from them, you deliver those to the consumers, all of us on this call, and then once we're done with it, we toss it somewhere. But where is it being tossed? And so we have to be able to reuse, we have to be able to recycle, we have to be able to compost. Okay, and so as I was mentioning, our current system is very much a take, make, waste system. It's something that I definitely want you all to be able to take from this. Right now, we are taking those materials from forests, from fields and the like. We're producing different products. and then we utilize them and then dispose of them, typically in a very negative way. Most communities use landfills, but as you saw on the map earlier, the Northeast is very big on using trash incinerators. So a lot of this is going into communities that is subsequently being burned up. And you then have to deal with the toxic ash of all the stuff that was left over. And that goes to a landfill as well. So then the workers have to deal with the impact of that pollution. So we need to make our system not make waste anymore. All right, so 75% of what we dispose of is reusable, recyclable, or compostable. So that's 3 out of every 4 objects basically that we throw in the trash typically are reusable, recyclable, or compostable. That's your food waste, that's your glass bottles, that's your medicine bottles, that's your water bottles, things like that. But the problem is our national recycling rate's only 34%. And when you focus in on Baltimore, our recycling rate's only about 15%. And even that is kind of a generous percentage, because a lot of that material ends up back at the incinerator because of the way we recycle. It ends up being contaminated. They can't use it on the market. So our recycling rate's actually much lower, very close to single digits. All right, so this is the zero waste hierarchy. This is what the International Solid Waste Association has put together. And as you can see, the top amount is rethink and redesign. And what that means is the 25% of material that we were talking about that isn't recyclable, reusable, or compostable, we need to rethink how we create those products. So to where that 25% can actually be reused and reduced from the system. And so you can see that reducing is the second on the tier here on the hierarchy. Then you get to reuse. And you see that recycling and composting is 4 ways down. It makes more sense to do the first 3 sections sooner than it does recycling and composting or material recovery. And at the end, very bottom, you see that the unacceptable is waste deregulation and incineration. We do not want any incineration because that's just keeping the take-make waste system alive. We need to focus on the rethink, redesign, the reducing, the reusing, and then the recycling and composting. Okay, and so when we're talking about jobs, it's important to realize how many jobs can be created from recycling and reuse. When you landfill and incinerate, you only create 1 job per 10,000 tons of material that you're handling for incineration, and 4 to 6 jobs at landfills. But if you recycle, you're going to create 36 jobs for that same amount of waste. But if you reuse and remanufacture that material, you're actually going to create 300 jobs. So see how just magnitude increase of job opportunities when you recycle and when you reuse and remanufacture. And Baltimore in particular would end up with about 2,000 jobs, full-time jobs that would emerge if we actually committed to zero waste. And think of the impact of 2,000 new jobs on the city that lost a lot of its manufacturing over the last 60 years. And zero waste infrastructure is actually drastically cheaper than incinerators and landfills. Just to go back a moment, one of the biggest issues that we have in the city is job loss and intergenerational poverty. When those manufacturing jobs left, that meant a lot of Black families had fewer opportunities to be able to build wealth for their families. And that led to a lot of the struggles that the city is facing today, with higher crime rates, with more folks being homeless. Like the fact that we haven't replaced those jobs or provided education for the previous generation or the generation before that, as well as it has been provided for primarily white residents of Baltimore. It has caused this very big struggle that we've seen over the last several decades. But zero waste infrastructure is drastically cheaper than incinerators and landfills. It makes far more sense to invest in those. And you made it to the end. Good job.